Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So I have been on this path of talking about aspects of practice, aspects that we often don't talk about or pay a whole lot of attention to necessarily. But so I wanted to continue with yet another one of our practices that belong in the monastic tradition as well as the lay tradition. It belongs to anybody, any of us in Zen practice. And I think it relates a little bit to last week's talk also. We spoke last week about learning to die in the Anthropocene, about that book. I spoke about that book. And one of the things that the author recommends in terms of interrupting the voice, the chaotic voice right now, particularly of politics, interrupting that is the development of culture, our own development of putting aside that chaos and reading good literature, listening to good music, developing a sense of culture, because that's the rich life. That is what totally benefits us. And that very rich culture comes very much out of the oral tradition. He refers to Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh is the first story that we have, very much in the oral tradition. And so many other of parts of our literature come through the oral tradition. Much poetry does. So the practice that we have in the Zen tradition, well, I'm going to call it by what we had when I was in grade school, and I don't know, maybe some of you here are quite young, and maybe you didn't call it the same thing. It developed a different name mid-20th century, but we used to call it learning by heart. Mm-hmm. Did you get learning by heart? Was that the term used?
I think so.
Yeah, learning by heart. No? No, it's not. Okay. It'd be immediately familiar to you if you heard of learning by heart. And that was what we did. We learned by heart. We're going to learn this by heart, class, right? And so many things we learned by heart. And mid-20th century, it began to be called memorization, which is a different kind of flavor to it. But this learning by heart, I think, is a very interesting way to look at the practice of learning by heart in our Zen tradition, in which we learn the literature by heart, or we learn the forms by heart. And the reason I like to call it learning by heart is that it is a practice that resides so deeply in the heart-mind, in the body-mind, in the intuitive mind. It is intended to go so deeply inside the memory, the temple of memory that resides within us. Each one of us has a temple within, a temple of memory. And it's a beautiful thought that everything that has happened to us, wonderful or not so wonderful, everything we have learned resides in us, in this temple. And we can hold that without discrimination and without discarding any aspect of our experience. And learning by heart is a deep practice in Zen. We are, as a Zen priest, we are required expected, let me say it that way, to learn all of the liturgy by heart, to know it by heart. And the priest I trained with stayed 1 full extra year just for that very purpose. He said, I don't want to leave until all of the liturgy resides in me. And so, once we learn something by heart, it can never be taken away from us. We have it forever. We have it forever in us. When the books are gone, when we can't go on to the internet to look something up, those prayers reside in us and actually transform the whole health of the body-mind. They reside in the nervous system, and they reside in the muscles and the sinew of this body, which is, as we are calling it, the intuitive body. And so that body knows where to go in a time of turmoil or at any time. We have this entire literature within us that we can call upon and use in that temple of memory. Not only is this so affirming of the body of a Zen practitioner, of the body-mind of a Zen practitioner, which helps to completely root us in our practice, gives us tremendous confidence that that liturgy resides in us. Not only that, but more on a health level, for those present who are beginning to age, the memorizing things or learning something by heart constantly stimulates the dendrites so that we are able to retain deep aspects of memory as we get older. And the dendrites do not disappear from the body, from the brain, but they do become inactive if we don't continue to stimulate them. So continuing to learn something new stimulates the dendrites so that they remain very keen and very facile in being able to recall all kinds of knowledges that we already contain. 2 sentences a day, 2 passages a day, 1 sentence a day even, would do that for us, would begin to wake up that heart, mind, body of the learning by heart practice that is fundamental. It's a fundamental practice in Zen. I swore that I would learn the Lotus Sutra, the Myoho Rengekyo Kanzei Onbosatsu from Monbonge, before the next time I go to Japan. It's very, very difficult to learn. But I really would like to learn it before I die. We don't chant it in Japanese enough to be able to memorize. But, what happens in Zen practice? If you continue to practice, you come, and if you recite the liturgy every day, you discover after a year, oh, well, of course I know the Heart Sutra in Japanese. Of course I know it in English. It just happens because you repeat it. And without the spirit of repetition, we cannot embrace Zen practice. We have to have the spirit of repetition. It has to be there. So, without it, we can't do very much. We can't remember the forms or the ceremonies or the practices. And once memorized, we are able to transcend the problem of, oh, what should I do now? Or the problem of fear of what's going to happen in the Zendo next and I won't know what to do, or any sense of insecurity about the practice. One just is rooted in it and is able to completely transcend any of the difficulties. And when we have a Zendo of chanting without the books, where everybody has memorized, it is a spectacular happening, a spectacular thing that happens. So, very powerful that happens. So just like some discussion about it, of the difficulties we have in doing such a thing. The oral tradition existed strongly until the printing press, 14, whatever it is. And once the printing press came, we didn't have to remember as much because it was written down on paper and we could refer to it. And we go all the way now to the end of the 20th and the 21st century, and we have the invention of the computer. Now all of a sudden you don't have to remember anything. And the shift that is happening in the brain, we just don't know what it means. But there was a great shift in the 1500s when the printing press came about. Oral tradition began to die. And yet, if we think about this fellow in the learning to die in the Anthropocene, we have to return to that tradition. We have to reclaim the orality of literature and the music of literature, and the voice of culture has to come out of our memory and our voices, so that is the bath that we reside in. The interiority is where our motivation comes from. It is an interior matter. Of course, there's no difference between inside and outside, actually. But motivation is an interior thing, and the practice of learning by heart is an interior development that we bring to the fore in order to do good in the world. So I did want to try and raise some discussion about this. I think it's a most interesting difficulty right now, and yet something that we as Zen practitioners ought to address and consider how we can bring that, not just for the liturgy, but for memorization and for learning by heart, some things that are dear to us. There are some very fine poets who've always recommended that you put together your own anthology of your favorite poems, and then one by one you learn them by heart, and that you let that music reside in you, because poetry has a musicality, it has a rhythm, and that rhythm comes into the body when we ourselves are writing. And when I taught poetry, I required my students to learn just one poem. Oh, my Lord. You would think that I had asked them to walk on fire or something. It was a very difficult thing for them to do, but I said, that's what you're going to do. You're going to recite one poem for the whole class in this quarter, in this, sometime. And so we would have, one person a day would say their poem, and it was just, it was so hard for them. And part of that is because we don't have to remember anything anymore. And yet, the loss of our history, the loss of what's going on, the loss of knowing. I will reveal that I was at my travel agent recently, and I had made arrangements to take the trip to Zurich and to land in London and fly to Zurich. And she had been in London 3 weeks earlier. And I said, well, how was the city considering the Brexit business? And she said, what is Brexit? And I said, well, gosh. I couldn't imagine how somebody could not know about Brexit, but I guess maybe there are people in this room who don't know about Brexit either, but it's big. It's a big thing. So it's a big deal. It's as stupid in Britain as America is being stupid as America is. So we're sort of mirroring one another's idiotic behavior. But just to lift our minds up to awareness of what is going on around us and residing in our own mind capabilities. Anyway, so maybe you have some thoughts about the difficulties of this, or sharing some thoughts about it. It's a wonderful Zen practice.
Son, one thing that jumped into my mind as you were speaking, when I was growing up, I attended Catholic school, K through 12. Mm-hmm. And I remember grudgingly taking. I did not like English. And it wasn't until years later that it occurred to me that what they were trying to do was to provide a classical liberal arts education, which I think is what he was hinting at.
Sure.
And
he's not just hinting, he's saying study the humanities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I guess to follow on that, the absence of that type of education creates the situation that you just described, where someone is, essentially you have no past, you have no history, you only have this moment and what you want or don't want. And that's quite dangerous, I think.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what the antidote is. It seems like the system has a kind of inertia of its own. But what was his first name? Scranton? Tom?
Thomas Scranton.
I guess we have to take responsibility ourselves for doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it's true that we reside in now, and we very much talk about that in Zen practice. But we sit on the mountain of everything that has gone before us. It isn't as though we don't have this incredible history of Buddhism behind us. When we are sitting in the center of the Buddhist discussion, we have all of that. And we have it because of the oral tradition, because it's carried forward through the oral tradition to us. And so we sit in now on the mountain of history. It's an important point. I mean, on Saturday morning we recite the long lineage from Shakyamuni Buddha through Dogen Zenji to now, to my teacher, to now, to sitting here now. And now is now because of them. So, and to not have that, as you say, to have no sense of, what we've been given or where we've come from and what we've...
Well, I sometimes run into people and they have no sense of geography, where places are or how they're related to other. It's astounding to me sometimes. And yet they're more than willing. Oh, we've got to go fight here. We've got to. And they don't even know where it is.
Yeah.
Like, where is Afghanistan?
Sure. Well, now you don't even have to know how to get from here to someplace because of GPS.
Mm-hmm.
You just plug that into your iPhone, and you don't have to remember even how to find your way through these streets. So, but that loss of mental capacity is very difficult, very dangerous, actually, I think. Yes, Mickey.
My 8th grade teacher was quite elderly, and I think she retired the year after that I was in her class. But she built her whole curriculum around memorization. And we had to memorize, we had to know these pieces by heart, and each child had to come up and sit by her desk and recite the piece for the week. And she'd check off. I was really good at that. I mean, I could memorize very easily, and I always did it perfect. Until we came to the Gettysburg Address. So I just could not get it. I went up to her desk every day, and every day, nope, you don't have it. I could go up to a certain point, and then I would just get in a loop and go round and round repeating the same thing instead of getting on to the end. I do the same thing. It's the same thing with the Heart Sutra in Japanese.
Yeah.
In English, I know it, but in Japanese, I can go up to a certain point and then it turns into a loop and I can't get out of it.
Sure, when you're doing it yourself. Yeah.
Any tips?
Yeah, certainly.
I thought you would have
Yes,
some.
I mean, certainly on that particular point, you do have to use some mnemonics at some point and say that when you get to that point, that you really look at the text and you connect it in some particular mnemonic way to the next word. I mean, I'm having that same trouble with Myoho Rengekyo because it's very repetitious. Nenbi kannon rikigen soka muso son keito mujin nyojo kannon yozen. I mean, it's very difficult. So there's that, and especially Daihishin Darani, we have the same thing. But you have to determine that you are going to tag on that next word and you repeat it over and over and over again until you go there with your mind so that you don't run on that loop. And it's just a strategy for that. But, one of the claims about memorization or about learning by heart was that you can learn something by rote, but it doesn't know that you learned it. And I think that has some merit to it. But at the same time, since that resides in you, it comes up and it means again different each part of your life. When your life comes to a different place, that means something again. And it expands for us because we have it. If we don't have it in us, we have no opportunity for that expansion to take place. But that's one claim, learn by rote. But if you don't have it at all, then you haven't learned anything either. Anyway, that was the claim of education in, I guess, the 70s or 80s. It was the 80s, when education said, we're not going to have our kids memorize anything anymore because they're just learning it by rote and they don't know what it means. So they cut out memorization.
If something that you have memorized as a child, as you pass through different developmental stages, the words mean something different.
Yes.
It means more and more.
Yes.
And you see, because you have learned it, you see things in it that you would never see just on the first read-through.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you think you understand.
Right, yeah. And I'd venture, if you stay with the literature and Zen practice, and you participate in the ceremony, you have a wave of something of emotion that comes over you that you just say, oh my goodness, I had no idea, I didn't realize that. And that happens frequently with all of us deeply in practice. Suddenly you have this wave of opening and you say, oh my word, I just realized that. And that can be because you have that in you to begin with. So it's precious. It's a precious thing to do. Anybody? Yes, Betsy.
It's kind of a simple thing, but it's remarkable for me when you said learn by heart. When I was a kid, learn by heart was said, but all it meant to me was memorize. And when you said it tonight, it's like, oh, learn by heart. And so I can see learning a poem by heart now. If I thought of it as learn by heart, it won't be as hard. Because as soon as I say memorize, it becomes a burden.
Right.
And a lot of the things I've memorized, I don't remember. Mm-hmm. Because I memorized, I didn't learn it by heart. And so...
However, if you start learning by heart some things, what you memorized earlier will come back. You got it in you.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And yet that whole learn by heart has taken on a whole different meaning for me tonight. Sure. I hadn't even thought about it. I hadn't thought about that since I was learning by heart in grade school.
Yeah. I mean, we really take it into the heart.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
That's where it's residing. Yeah. That's what it's meant to do. Yeah. It becomes our in us, in the deepest place. So wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right, well, do good out there, folks. Just one sentence a day. Just one little thing that you've always wanted to just remember. Or maybe some quote you come across in a book that you're reading, and you say, gee, I'd like to be able to remember that. Remember it.
Breathes there the man with soul so dead who never to himself has said, this is my own, my native land, whose heart has ne'er within him turned, as home, whose heart has ne'er within him burned, as home his footsteps he has turned from wandering on the foreign strand. Did you have to do that one?
No, I had the quality of mercy is not strained.
Yeah.
It droppeth as a gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesses him that gives and him that takes. It is mighty and the mightiest. His scepter bears the force of temporal power, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above the sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. And earthly justice doth them likest gods when mercy seasons justice. Therefore, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. We do ask for mercy, and that deed renders the deeds of mercy. So that was mine, Mickey. I got plenty more, but I was a little bit off on a few words there, but anyway. It's wonderful to have these. And my friend Jean Lohman, who died a couple of years ago, Jean had a body of poetry in her that was just remarkable. She just could speak it out, and it was just wonderful. Well, many of us who are doing the daily liturgy can now recite Ryokan's poems, can we not? And those are wonderful to be able to say just by, just to be able to speak them out without having to read them. It makes a big difference. So that every week or every time we recite one of the poems, some little word comes up or one of the passages comes up and it strikes you and it hits, and you are maybe overcome by the beauty of it. So that's what we do in Zen practice. So it's what a wonderful opportunity we have. So, anybody else, anything at all? Okay.